Hey, this is Stephen Christian of Amberlin, and you are watching the Lab Podcast.
But you're free to go. All right. Here's a crazy story. We are both from Oregon, fifth-generation Oregonians, right? Mm-hmm. And so my guest and I are both fifth-generation Oregons who did not know each other before Stephen Christian introduced us. So crazy story, but this morning I had the chance to hang out with another Oregonian, and it was good. And so I can't wait to share it with you. My next guest is the editor-at-large for Outreach Magazine, and that tells this story. But really what captured my heart is he is an author who is near God. And he's a man who has a gift to write. He has a gift for words. But the greater gift, I think, is just a sensitivity that when I picked up The Listening Day, which is the devotional that he wrote, we've got a few copies here and we're going to give some away. I read a lot, and The Listening Day has kind of slid to the forefront as the one that quite literally I said to Cammie, this is how we are going to start our days. And it's just rich and it is beautiful. So Paul has authored 3 books that have been published and are out that you can go find and buy. They're just his work. Many, many more that he has co-authored and written for, I think 40-something. You lose count. Yeah.
There's a lot.
There's a lot. There you go. So would you do me a huge favor? Welcome another Oregonian, my guest, my friend now, Paul Pastor.
You guys are very kind.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I tried to get him to drink kombucha with me, but it's not happening. So
It tastes like apple cider vinegar. Is that an unpopular opinion?
That's something like that. All right. Well, we started out our day. I got to listen to Paul, and I'm hopeful that tonight one of the things that comes away is, if nothing else, that we encourage all of us to leave this room listening in a different way. And so just kind of frame that in your mind. And I want to start the conversation outside like this, because in your book, The Face of the Deep, I came across this little just beautiful nugget where you said that if the Bible were a movie and place could be a character, that wilderness would be center stage in the story. And take us into that. Why, in your opinion, is wilderness at the center of our story?
Take us into the wilderness?
Yeah, come on.
Okay.
In Florida.
In Florida. Take us into the Florida wilderness, where the wild manatees will ambush us from amongst the palm fronds. Yeah, the Bible is interesting. It's not just the Bible, but we see it really clearly in the Bible. Every culture that lives close to nature has a special sacred relationship with places that people don't control. And that issue of control is what the wilderness is all about. We often use the cliche, that was a real dry time in my life. That was a desert time. That was a wilderness time. And it's a real pity that that's become like a Christianese saying and a cliche, because the truth of it is human, it's perennial, and it's something that rests inside our souls because it's reflected in the outer world. It's reflected in the natural world. In our generation and in our part of the world, we have the privileged curse, the demonic convenience of comfort. Very few of us know what it is to kill our food at all, and yet we eat food that has been killed. Very few of us know what it means to eke an existence out of the ground, and yet we eat the product of others' labor ungratefully, and so ungratefully that we throw away near to 50% of the food that is grown. Right? We are so disconnected from what it takes to live the existence that we live that when we begin to think about a loss of control in the natural world, we almost don't even have a framework for it. Those of us who have felt it have usually felt it recreationally. I was climbing a mountain on my paid break from my tech job, and I slipped and fell on a glacier. I was backpacking the Pacific Crest Trail during my gap year from college, and I got lost. And so I suppose what we need is to understand the wilderness as a place where we truly aren't in charge. The gift that gives us is perspective and truth. Truth. Because we're not in charge, really, of much of anything. As we look around here in this beautiful building, polished glass, bright lights, we have the illusion that humanity is in control, but the truth is one hurricane and this is all gone. One flood and this is all gone. One itchy trigger finger by the enemy of our country and this is all gone. So we get to learn that on a personal level during times where we're not in charge. We talk about those times as wilderness times, and they can be all sorts of different things. Some of them really big and some of them really small. They can be sickness. They can be unemployment. They can be the death or a loss of a loved one. They can be this nagging sense that there is a reality inside us of guilt, of shame, of trauma, of pain that we can't control, and that if it really got out, it would consume us alive. And we're afraid of that because we know that the wilderness might mean death, and that's its gift. It tells us the truth about ourselves. And in that space, we're able to meet God.
Yeah, I don't want to go. That sounds scary.
Oh, that's the point, right? That's the point. We don't want to go.
And yet, what is the literal, there's a relationship between the Holy Spirit and the wilderness that's really pretty unique. And if you follow the biblical story, if you're conversant in that story, there is this sense that the Spirit almost like wants you to go there, wants you to experience, takes you. So it's not that God like...
Can we talk about Jesus? Let's talk about Jesus.
You absolutely
Okay,
can.
so we have 4 gospel accounts written in Greek, right? Of those 4, let's think about how Mark and how Luke talks about Jesus entering the wilderness. Luke says, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, the synoptics. We'll look at that. They each use a different verb to talk about how Jesus entered it. And the Spirit acts in each one. In Matthew, if my memory serves me correctly, Jesus is led into the wilderness by the Spirit. In Luke, it's even a little bit gentler. Jesus is led about in the wilderness. In Greek, there's this sense of meandering. Jesus is in the desert. Here is a temptation. Here is a cactus. I am hungry. It hath been 40 days since I hath supped. Right? Mark is different. Mark's real rough. Mark says that the Spirit threw him into the wilderness, flung him. The word is ballo. It's where we get the word ball in English. And so you picture the Messiah, right? The beloved Son of God, the one who just was baptized in the Jordan River in Mark's account, on whom the dove came down and this voice from heaven speaks, and we see him as beloved. And now that one is picked up and smushed up like clay and flung, thrown into the wilderness. And for most of us, that's what it takes. That's the experience that it takes. So Jesus, whatever that reality refers to in his life, was flung into the wilderness. And I think that speaks to so many of our experience, right? But we don't often have language for the idea that our loving God might at times, from his love, be rough with us.
What's the function if God, this loving God, kind of invites, sets up, allows for, flings us, throws us into the wilderness, or allows that experience? What's the function? How does wilderness function in the life of kind of maturing Christ in us?
I wish I knew. You'll have to ask him that question for yourself. Because I suspect...
You went to school for this.
I suspect it's such a personal function that you will emerge with the gift that it's meant to give you. But something will be given to you in that space that can only be given to you by means of the wilderness. I truly believe that.
What are the clues that tell us, to pay attention to? Because I think for us in the West, and even in the church in the West, we don't have language for the wilderness. We don't have reps and experience in the wilderness. That's a new thing for us. And yet we've been there. Maybe unknowingly, part of our life has been lived there. We just didn't know that that's what was happening. What are some ways, what are some clues maybe that could help us as we journey to pay attention or to listen more closely for those times where God is inviting us into silence, solitude, disruption, those things that are a part of the wilderness experience.
What are the clues? I'm sorry, can you ask that question a different way?
A more straightforward.
Yeah, I don't understand the question.
Yeah, no, it's good. Maybe I don't either. And
Okay.
that's the thing, is that I think we're trying to, what I'm grasping at is for so many of us who attend church, we just don't, we don't know that we've entered the wilderness. Does that make sense? And on a journey in life, there's roadmaps and there's markers that say, I think in Oregon, outside of Sisters, there's one that says like boundary road, don't go any farther. And it is truly the next sign you see is you're entering the wilderness area. And so you're seeing a sign that says like, you're about to experience this. And I think in my life, what I've experienced is that I maybe blew past things that were saying, pay attention, pay attention. I want you to listen. I'm drawing you closer. And I'm wondering if there's, just in your writing about the Holy Spirit, if there's a way that he tunes our ear.
Okay, yes, but I'm not convinced we ever choose to go to this place of desolation. We've been gifted by God in our very bodies, as well as our spirits, to have a survival instinct, right? You don't go and walk off a cliff. You don't go walk around in the Judean desert for 40 days without supplies. You don't do that. That's not smart. It's legitimately not smart. It's going against your survival instinct. And so if you're really in the wilderness, you are there not wanting to be there. In fact, you want to get out right now. My message, at least the point of the book, is that the Spirit is like the wind in the wilderness that meets you there. It's carried you to that place. It will sustain you, but it's not going to be like you expect or prefer. And ultimately, you will be able to say thank you for that gift. But the Spirit doesn't expect you to say thank you until you're out on the other side of it. Because if it's a true wilderness experience, it's true desolation, true emptiness. In a deep sense, it's death. It's true death. And that's what Jesus promised his followers would experience. And perhaps part of the reality that rubs us the wrong way, or what feels like it is a bit of a bait and switch with Christianity sometimes, is that in our culture we've expected a narrative of success and victory when it comes to our Christian life. And there is success and victory in the Christian life. Okay, there's this sense of overcoming that's really beautiful, but it's always hard won. And the way of Christ, if you're following him, he said specifically would take his path. And what was his path? It didn't just lead to like Golgotha, the place of death, the place of the skull. It led to Gethsemane, the place where he was faced with his own weakness, his own total desolation, his own, if it's your will, may this cup please pass from me, please. He sweat blood like his capillaries burst under an olive tree in Jerusalem because he was so stressed about what he was about to go through. And yet he said, not my will, but yours be done. And so perhaps as we transition out of this conversation about the wilderness, that's the point that perhaps can transmute that type of experience. If you're in that experience right now, like I'll just speak directly to you. If you're in that experience of desolation, the only thing I have to say to you is Jesus was there before you and you are not alone. God himself knows how you feel. And what you want to say is, take this from me, please. You're allowed to pray that prayer. But nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done. And that's the act of surrender that accomplishes the work of the wilderness in our hearts.
Yeah. It's not easy.
It can't be easy.
No.
The function of it is against ease.
I think that's part of what inspired me to, we could talk about the devotional side and we'll get into the listening day and that art of listening. But part of what I wanted to do by hosting the conversation is just bring, I don't know about you or people listening, there's disruption even within me to talk about this. And yet it's the ground we tread. And it's a space that we have to become more comfortable with and realize that God is here. You wrote a devotional that said, even here. Even here. But it's not easy. Let me read this. This is from The Face of the Deep, which is a beautiful, beautiful work. The Face of the Deep. It says, we must know the Spirit's desert road, the trail away from the roars of man and nature. That kind of being is a difficult trick to master if we do not learn to know what silence, the real silence of the soul and not of the ears, sounds like. Let me take us back just because I want to get some clarification. We must know the Spirit's desert road, the trail away from the roars of man and nature. That kind of being is a difficult trick to master if we do not know what silence, the real silence of the soul. Unpack that a little bit, that space between the roars of man and the roars of nature. Take us into that. And what are you describing there? What are we grasping at to try to find that silence?
Yeah, at the beginning of that chapter, I described the experience of on a trail near my house that is this beautiful, pristine trail that leads into the Hatfield Wilderness, which is this great, untouched wilderness area around Mount Hood. And you're still able to hear like this interstate in one ear as you like climb the trail up there. And it became sort of this metaphor of like, man, you're looking for silence, and yet there's these like competing like sensory experiences that just rush in upon you. And my point of that is, I think there are two types of noise. There's the noise that's external, and then there's a noise that's internal. And the external noise is relatively easy to get rid of. A nice set of Bose noise-canceling headphones will begin that process, or walking way into the deep woods and like lying down, or just finding a quiet space. We can do that. But what walks around with us and honestly disturbs us more than the noise that comes in through our ears is this sense of internal unease or disquiet, the sense of internal noise, the sense of chatter, the sense of distraction. And that's exacerbated horribly in our culture, right? The act of attention in our culture is commodified. Your attention is bought and sold by corporations. Men in suits discuss how to take your attention from you for their profit. That is immoral and against the ways of God. Okay? And I'll preach that all day long. But the truth is, the chatter that's inside is just as dangerous. And in fact, it gets even more personal, because the chatter that's inside tries to speak the truth to us, a truth that we don't want to hear. You all know voices of shame and guilt that try to take these little true things about you and blow them out of proportion. You all know the noise of an inner monologue that you would love to quiet, and you feel like you can't. And so we have to practice remembering silence. We have to practice remembering and trying to surrender those voices, those patterns of voices, to the Spirit who wishes to speak more truly to us. And he very rarely shouts. He very rarely shouts. His voice is usually a whisper.
What have you found to be, for you, ways that where you can find that kind of silence, that kind of solitude? Have you built a discipline where you say, I must begin my days, in my days, periodically throughout the week? But just as a creature, have you found there to be rhythms that you might be able to share all the way from the west to the east?
That's such a great question. Yeah. Yes, I try to do things that I naturally enjoy and that don't fill up my brain with noise. That's kind of basic. But I actually picked up a really special practice from the Desert Fathers, who were a monastic community in Egypt around the year 400. And it was really encouraging when I was reading like some of their stories and sayings that they struggled profoundly with distraction, because it sort of is, Okay, we sometimes idolize monastic-style lifestyles. If I could just go into the woods and be a hermit, all those voices would quiet down. If I could just move into the woods of Oregon and cavort among the creeks and beautiful wildflowers, that would be it.
It's half
Then
true.
I could hear God.
It's half true.
Then I could hear God. Yeah, it's half true.
It's half true.
But also it's not,
Yeah.
right? I have a literal creek running 15 feet out of my kitchen door. It's wonderful. I can walk out and catch crawdads and toss rocks in the water. That's awesome. But you know what? I carry my noise around with me just like anybody else. And what the Desert Fathers said was, you have to, I'm summing up more than one teaching here, you have to let those things pass through you. Oof. You have to let those things pass through you. You have to allow yourself to be distracted without holding on to it. Because your mind has something to do. Your soul has something it wants to do. It has something it wants to say. You're speaking to yourself about yourself. And that noise, which really is a distraction and which really does need to be quieted for you to hear the Spirit, it's happening for a reason. And the louder you shout at it, the more noise you're creating. So the practice, which is super counterintuitive, is let it happen. If you want to quiet your soul down, just take some time, let the distraction come. In my experience, it's about 12 to 15 minutes.
Yeah.
That's less than half the length of like standard television show. If you can sit through an episode of like a rerun of The Office, right? You can sit through that first flush of distraction. Let it come. Let it go. Because on the other side, at some point, you'll run out of things to say to yourself. You'll quiet down. And that's the point of holy crisis, where you'll start to hear the truth.
Yeah. I think that's in the listening day, there's this conversation that you're having, you're listening and you're replying, and the conversation between you and God. And I think that it's something that we desire, we want, that kind of fluent conversation, this conversant life, practicing His presence. But these are hard disciplines, you know, finding time for solitude and silence. We did an exercise with some pastors who you would think have reps at this and they're all Desert Fathers, but 60 seconds of silence was disruptive. 2 minutes was almost unbearable. 3 minutes was like, what are we doing? Do you ever want a job again? Because you're out of your mind to take us into that practice. And so 15 minutes, 12 minutes of silence and solitude, man, oh man. And yet there's a sense that if we create that space, that God is speaking. And I think that's what you're getting at the listening day. There is something truly beautiful that God is trying to do within us. And we're invited to create space for it.
Let me be really clear about something. My faith is best on display on the page. I write to like connect with God in this way, but it is a struggle, and it will never not be a struggle. You had dudes who moved into the desert of Egypt in the year, like around the year 400, when they were like teenagers, and they lived there till the day they died, and they still were struggling with some of these basic things, but they got better at that. And I bear witness to the fact that I struggle with this kind of thing every single day. It's not like I'm some sort of wilderness guru who has it all figured out. You need to know that's not true. But I bear genuine witness to the fact that I'm getting better at it. And that's kind of incredible.
Yeah. I think that's the thing that's so wonderful. And what I want to like invite us all into is there is a depth. Like if you get in a swimming pool at like the 2-foot level, and then you're 3 feet in and 4 feet in, and then it gets like chest high, which for me comes really fast, and then it goes and goes and goes, and then you're like, you're in the deep. And I don't know if that's what you intended, but there is life with God that is there, and He wants that kind of relationship with us. There's some practices we've talked about them: silence, solitude. There's a relationship of the Spirit and nature, that you are in an environment that you didn't create and you don't control. And so I'm hoping that you're picking these things up and going, man, these are things that are not just lofty philosophical, theological conversations of two guys that came from Oregon and want to talk about it. This is creature-creator conversation saying, I miss you. Yeah.
Can I say something encouraging?
You can do whatever you want.
You guys are probably already doing a lot of this stuff instinctively.
Yeah.
Like while you wash the dishes. For me, it was riding my bike. I commuted by bike for a long time. And at one point, I was really struggling with the fact that I couldn't stay focused in prayer. And like, I felt like I wasn't reading my Bible enough. Kind of all the stupid Christian stuff. And at the time, I was, being mentored by this little French-Canadian priest named Father Stephen with like thick little glasses. And he would like lapse into French and Latin, and like he was just a larger-than-life character. It was awesome. And he pointed out to me that, one, you don't always need words to pray. And two, my daily routine of riding home on my bicycle, decompressing, my legs pumping blood, my heart rate going up, was actually a time that I connected with God. I was already doing it. So if you're here feeling discouraged, I would just ask you, like, look to what you're already doing. What do you turn to that gives a sense of peace and solace already? There's probably something. Do more of that thing. God's already meeting you there. You can trust your inner instinct to be healthy. You can, if you're in this room, if you still are somebody who thinks that Jesus has this magnetic pull to your heart, the Spirit of God is in you, and you can be trusted to know and taste what's good for you. You don't need me to tell you what to do. Do more of that thing that brings you life. Do more of that practice that can be recognized as something deeply spiritual, but that might be so personal it would be hard to explain or teach to another person. For me right now, it's chopping wood. We heat our home almost exclusively with wood. And you know, there's this meditative chore. It's a chore. It's not like this romanticized thing. Like, you get messy, you dust your knuckles up. You got to carry all this stuff around. It's grimy and you get splinters. But that time has become pretty precious and focused. So lean into that. You know what's good for you.
Yeah.
Do it.
Do it. Yeah. There is a goodness for the soul. There is a life that we were created to have. That's life and beauty, life to the full. And we can make that so quick and so cheap, but we're destined for it. We're created for it. And so there's a sense that God is inviting us to return back to some of these things that are very simple. They're very true about who we are as people. But there's a tension. It is a tension. As we move towards just closing the formal time, we're going to do some question and answer period. But even now, like, you can hear that music outside this space. There's so many things that are tough for us. And whether we live in Chicago or we live in Tampa or we live in Seattle or LA, there are different things that distract us and compete for our attention. If you could give us one piece of advice, say, hey, for not just us individually, but as we look for community. You know, as a pastor, people say, like, I'm looking for a church. How do I find a good church? And I'm curious what you would say, like, man, doing this together, there are things that are corporate disciplines then that are not just the things I do on my own. What have you found to be really life-giving in community, specifically the Christian community, that you say, man, that is rich and that time is good?
Genuine prayer. Genuine prayer. I mean, we often chalk prayer up to a way to open and close our times in a Christian way, or a chance to grandstand. But when you meet a group of people who honestly pray, who really believe that talking to God is valuable and beautiful, and that He might talk back, the Spirit in you will bear witness to the Spirit in them. And Christ Himself taught while He was among us that He was really there in your midst. When two or more people gathered in His name, He was really there. And I personally feel that most clearly through genuine prayer. It often doesn't look super pious. It's just honest. It's people honestly opening their hearts and speaking and listening.
What did you learn writing The Listening Day? You did 2 volumes, and on the back side of those 2 volumes, if you looked back and said, man,
There's 2 volumes out. There's 4 volumes total. So later this year, the complete collection is going to come out, and it's going to be a 365 entry, year-long thing that basically takes you in a circle, in a holy circle, through the year and through your own heart. What did I learn? Man, not once did God fail to show up. And I don't deserve that. I'm not that horrible of a person, but I'm not that great of a person either. And he'd just be faithful. So the book, for those of you who don't know, is structured. There's 2 verses that have some sort of connection, 2 Bible verses, and then a meditation in God's voice with my responses back as a conversation in the very old Christian tradition of Lectio Divina, or divine reading. And so it's sort of this poetic, creative way of just trying to listen to God through Scripture. And man, how cool is it? That's a lot of work. It's a lot of writing, I'm telling you. But not once did it feel hard.
Yeah.
There's a sense of flow to the Spirit's work. And people will sometimes, say really kind things about the books, any of the books. And I've come to learn, to say thank you, that's very kind, wonderful, I'm glad it spoke to you. But I genuinely feel like it's something that has passed through me creatively, and I just can't take credit for it. And I think for all of us, because you're all creative people in your way, every single one of you, no matter what you do, no matter where you serve, you have a unique God-given gift that only you can give the world. It's like being a camera lens. And Christ is the camera, and you are a unique lens with a unique focus, a unique range and field of vision. Every one of us different. And it's like that image passes through us when we create. Whether it's a book, whether it's a podcast, whether it's Jerome setting up this beautiful space and creating space for us to be in. Every one of you, as parents, as workers, as entrepreneurs, I don't care if you're flipping burgers at McDonald's, you can make that into a beautiful and creative act by surrendering it to the Spirit. And I guess as we prepare to draw to a close, that would be the excitement that I'd want to share with you, is this sense of holiness and sacred weight for your life. This incredible sense of joy. God is doing something through you already that is incredible. And He will do more. He will be faithful to do more. He will be faithful to complete the good work He has begun in you, no matter what it is. And it will require big things of you. It's dangerous. And we're back to the wilderness here. John the Cross said every one of us have to pass through the fire of purging, the fire of refinement. And he said that feeling, this metaphorical fire that we pass through in this dark night of the soul, or the wilderness, or whatever you want to call it, is like a dark fire. It doesn't even give you light when you're in the middle of it. And so I just want to say, it's worth it. Persist. I've been through my own suffering, my own wilderness times, and the Spirit's faithfulness has been remarkable. Don't give up. You have a gift for the world that God is giving the world through you. Learn to love your own uniqueness. Learn to surrender your very essence and person to Jesus. And learn to let the Spirit speak to you and through you. It's not hard. It's also not easy. It's not safe at all, and it's very strange. But just like the beginning, what He's creating in you is very good.
You said my favorite word, Strange has become like my favorite word. I just find that God is, there's almost no other word.
It's how you know it's God. It will always be strange.
Yeah, it's good. This has been so good that I want to close with this. If you're willing, I don't know if you have a favorite. If you have a favorite, would you read your favorite? But can we close with like a reading? I would love, since we've got you here, to just, these are so short, but just as a practice of like, to practice listening, to practice this new way. Man, I found, you pick.
Oh, man.
Unless you want me to pick.
All right, yep, I got it one.
All right.
This one's called A Radiant Hope. I'm going to start by reading 2 verses and then the meditation. Psalm 34, 4 through 5. I sought the Lord, and he answered me and delivered me from all my fears. Look to him and be radiant, so your faces shall never be ashamed. Romans 5:5. Hope does not put us to shame, because God's love has been poured out into our hearts. The whole world seeks to make you ashamed of who you are, of what you have done, of all that you have not done. Shame is the leverage of hell. It is the cruelest kind of condemnation because it begins inside your own heart. All your life, shame has stalked you. Shame is fear wearing a righteous mask. It would have no power over you if you were not afraid. You are afraid to be seen as naked, so you cover yourself. You are afraid to be seen as weak, so you work till you bleed to show how strong you are. You are afraid not to be poor, but to be seen as poor. Not to be alone, but to be seen as lonely. Not to die, but for others to see you dying. You know me so well. Hope crushes shame, for hope crushes fear. Love is a radiant hope for those who seek me. All along the way that leads east from Eden, there are stories of the one who chose weakness, who embraced poverty, who walked through the streets stripped naked by the cruelty of the world, all uncovered, all laid bare, and yet all radiant, and all hopeful, and all unashamed. You can join him. You can know what it is for shame to be crushed by radiance.
Amen.
Amen.